Hey everybody, this is Josh Ronquist here for Heavy Debriefings, and I can't believe I'm already doing the fifth one of these. It's the top 10 albums of 1992. Let's just get right into it with number 10, and it's Flotsam and Jetsam with Quattro. Yes, if you couldn't tell by the name, this is the fourth album from Flotsam and Jetsam, and it is the most different album, I dare say, in the whole band's discography. Of course, if you know Flotsam and Jetsam from the early days with Jason Newsted, if you know the latter day Flotsam and Jetsam where they're just on thrash, nearly power metal overload, this album is a little bit more alternative rock and metal, which is quite strange. It's got some proggy moments going on in there as well too, but there is a little bit of thrash going on, but it is much more in the alternative route. And I love it for that. I love it when a band experiments and it's done effectively. And Quattro is just a shining example of that. I mean, when you got songs like Natural Enemies and Swatting at Flies, which are two songs I used to cover in old cover bands of mine. Useless knowledge since, I don't get to play anymore. But that's how I discovered this album, was being able to check out songs from this album and just seeing that, yes, they are very good at thrash, but I like it when they're thrash adjacent just a little bit more. I know this album is a little bit of a left of center album. It is an album that is very controversial for the Flotsam and Jetsam community, but if you're willing to give it a chance, I think this is one that if you appreciate a little bit of thrash, but a lot more focus on alternative rock and alternative metal, this is an album worth checking out. Coming in at number 9 is the debut album from My Dying Bride, with As the Flowers Wither. This album is the most pure death doom album the band has ever made, because it's the only one that features only growls. No cleans on this one yet, although I will say when Aaron started incorporating the cleans, that's when it really starts to hit me the most. But this album is fantastic for what it's trying to pull off, which is that Peaceville sound, and it does it so magnificently. Yeah, I mean, this is borderline funeral doom, but it is that death doom sound. It is one of those original albums that inspired so many bands to try to incorporate death metal and doom metal at the same time. And of course, Funeral Doom many years later, but it's a great starting point with that. And if you've never checked this album out, but if you love the Death Doom eras of Paradise Lost, Catatonia, and Anathema, you are doing yourself a huge disservice by not checking out My Dying Bride. They are one of the best in Death Doom, and you should check out why. At number 8 is another debut album. It is Fear Factory with Soul of a New Machine. It's one of the most hard-hitting, energized albums Fear Factory has ever made. It's also one of the most raw and primal albums the band has ever made. Even though every Fear Factory album does have that great industrial sound to it, this is something that just feels a bit more, again, raw and primal compared to being everything focused perfectly just in a couple years later with Demanufacture. And there are pros and cons to this, but I think the pros heavily outweigh the cons. It feels very metal, it feels very thrash. The band is still trying to find the sound that they're looking for, but they are so close. And when you can almost find the sound that you're looking for on your debut album, I think you're doing it right. And of course you can hear the hints of what the band would become later. But yeah, this is the closest thing to a death metal album Fear Factory's made. And if you really like that heavy side, if you only really know Demanufacture or Obsolete, I think this is an album you should check out. And along those same lines, in that industrial style, we've got to talk about Ministry at number 7 with Psalm 69. And, I mean, do I really need to say it? This is the best Ministry album. And it's probably going to be the only Ministry album that shows up in this entire series. But every song on this album just simply rules. Whether it's NWO, whether it's Just One Fix, whether it's Jesus Built My Hot Rod, which, that's a classic right there. I mean, it incorporates so many different styles, but the band just kept getting heavier and heavier, And on this album, they found that perfect mix of that industrial side that they do so very well, and the metal side that, when they do it right, it works so perfectly. And when you meld those together, you get the perfect Ministry album, and Psalm 69 is that album. I know some people may argue for a different album, and the latter-day Ministry albums are someone's cup of tea, but Psalm 69, just utter pure perfection in the industrial metal route. And yeah, I can't recommend it enough if you need your industrial fix. Maybe just one fix. Sorry for the pun. At number 6, I have Blind Guardian with Somewhere Far Beyond. And this is where the band went from being that speed metal sound and started incorporating more folk and power metal. And that's my favorite era. Like Somewhere Far Beyond, Imaginations from the Other Side, all of these great albums that they were able to incorporate the folk, speed, and power metal perfectly. And it all started with Somewhere Far Beyond. Of course, you have one of the most legendary songs in the Blind Guardian discography and one of the most legendary songs in the power metal world with the Bard song. And it's funny because it's an acoustic song. But if you ever see Blind Guardian live, everyone in that audience will sing. And even if you don't know the words, by the time that it hits the chorus again, you'll be singing as well. This album stands out for a huge reason, and all it takes is just one listen to understand why. At number 5, I am showing more of my hardcore, alternative metal, closest thing to new metal you're really gonna get out of me. Maybe number 2 is an example, but I don't necessarily agree. But it is Helmet with Meantime. The reason I said all of that stuff is because Helmet did incorporate so many of those styles. And so many bands were influenced by Helmet to be able to create styles of music that I didn't really care for. But Helmet did it in a way that I do love. And Paige Hamilton's vocals are very hit or miss for people. For me, it is a dead-on hit. But for Helmet, this is arguably their best album, and it's for good reason, because everything that they were able to accomplish is done to perfection on this album. Well, it may not even be my favorite. There might be one that shows up later that may be my favorite. Maybe. It depends on the year. I'm trying not to give anything away, but through and through, from top to bottom, if you want that great alternative metal sound, you want that hardcore sound, you want a little bit of new metal, or at least understand where new metal bands came up with ideas for new metal, yeah, this is arguably the album that did it more than so many other bands. And yeah, I love Helmet to death. And you just might as well. At number 4, we got Edge of Sanity with Unorthodox. And this is a standout album for so many reasons. For one, it takes everything from the debut album, which I already talked about, but perfects it. They do it in such a way where they realized what worked in the band, what didn't work in the band, and everything that they wanted to be able to incorporate more later. And you'll be seeing a lot more Edge of Sanity to come. With this album, it is arguably one of the first albums to not only feature clean vocals for Edge of Sanity, but it is, in the song Enigma, it might be one of the first death metal songs to ever feature clean vocals. Like, predominantly clean vocals, especially in the beginning of the song. And when you have a vocalist like Dan Swano, you let that man sing. He can growl with the best of them. And he might even be one of, if not the best of them. But his clean vocals, far superior in my opinion. And the later Edge Insanity continues on, the more clean vocals you start to hear, and I love it for it. But if you want a death metal album that has just the tiniest bits of melodic moments, while still featuring that great Swedish old school death metal sound, and of course, like I mentioned, one of, if not the first appearance of clean vocals in any death metal, check out our Unorthodox by Edge of Sanity. At number 3 is a lot of people's number 1, but for me, like I just said, it is number 3. It's Alice in Chains with Dirt. And a lot of people say that Alice in Chains is a grunge band, and I disagree. They are a metal band that came out at the same time in the same area that grunge came out of. And I arguably feel the same way about Soundgarden. I don't think they're a grunge band either, even though they copied more of the aesthetic of grunge. I've never considered them to be a grunge band. And Alice in Chains, same thing. Never, ever considered them a grunge band. They have always been a metal band. And especially if you listen to them on their latest album, Rainier Fog, that is a sludge metal album. That is not even a heavy metal album. It's like sludgy, almost doom metal. And it's so cool to see that as of just a few years ago. And I really hope that there'll be a new Alice in Chains album coming out soon. But yeah, I mean, if you've never checked out Dirt, and, there's some people who never have. Some people berate you for not checking out a classic album, and to me, everyone's going to discover an album at some point. Quit crapping on people for not checking out the classics. They might not know about them. This album came out 31 years ago. You expect everyone to have checked it out by now? But if you do listen to classic rock radio of nowadays, and maybe even some current rock radio, you may hear songs off this album. If you're familiar with Alice in Chains, I mean, come on. Facelift is great, the self-titled is great, and I will say on the record, I think the William Duvall era is better than Alice in Chains with... Now, you know what? I can't say that because I know there's going to be a lot of comments, but wink wink, nudge nudge, the William Duvall era is better. But this is the best of the best with Lane Staley. And if you just want to hear that perfect alternative rock, alternative metal, heavy metal album that is so close to being something more dark and sinister than just a normal heavy metal album, yeah, it's Alice in Chains and it's Dirt. Number 2 is the other band I was kind of alluding to that help incorporate new metal, even though they only have one song that's rappy. And it's not even on this album. I already talked about it back in 1990. It's Faith No More, and it's their best album, Angel Dust. I think anyone who knows Faith No More outside of Epic knows that Angel Dust is the superior album of the band's whole discography. And maybe I'll do a backwards marathon on it pretty soon. I'm thinking I just might. But Angel Dust is a Faith No More album. I don't even know how to truly describe it because there's so many different kinds of songs on here. There's alternative rock, alternative metal, there's a little bit of country, a little bit of blues, near death metal at times, doom metal at times, a cheerleader anthem, which is about something I can't talk about on YouTube, but if you listen to the lyrics, you know what it's about. It's got a little bit of everything. It's almost like garden variety, except the songs all live up to quality. Every single song on this album is fantastic. Whether they're doing evil metal, whether they're doing something nice and poppy, whether they're covering the theme from Midnight Cowboy, or doing a Lionel Richie cover, it doesn't matter. Angel Dust has it all, and then some. And if you just want one of the most expansive overall experiences of what rock and metal was in 1992, you gotta check out Angel Dust by Faith No More. And finally, at number 1, this should be no surprise to anyone who personally knows me. It is, of course, without a shadow of the doubt, Dream Theater with Images and Words. Yes, the sophomore album from this legendary band is still... Yeah, it is still my favorite Dream Theater album. I have so many great experiences with this album. I remember I was becoming a sophomore in high school, where my little small town high school band, no, not the garage band, I mean in school, high school band, took a trip to New York City and we played on the USS Intrepid. We also saw a couple Broadway shows of Phantom of the Opera, and I believe Wicked. Might have been the light. No, it was Wicked. Yeah, it was Wicked. And On the way back, we were stuck either in New York or New Jersey. I mean, they're right next to each other. I can't remember where it was, but it was a mall. It had an FYE, and I had just gotten Train of Thought by Dream Theater, which you might see in a future episode. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And at that FYE, I had enough money left over from everything to be able to buy one album. And I was trying to decide what I wanted to get. It was either going to be Dream Theater's Images and Words, or it was going to be Dream Theater's 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence. And that would be my second Dream Theater album. I went with Images and Words, and I'm so glad I did, because it was basically my soundtrack to New York City. When we were going through town at night, like when we were going to the Broadway shows, off to the motels, or we're doing like the scenic trips and stuff, I had my CD player and I had this album on full rotation the entire time. And we didn't fly to New York City, we took a bus. And having enough batteries and enough CDs to get me through that, and not having to talk to people who didn't want me around in the first place, I needed an album to be able to get me through those New York City times. And hearing something as cheesy to the outsiders as Another Day, listening to that at night in Manhattan on a passenger bus, was one of the most overwhelming experiences I've ever felt. And of course, when you hear Metropolis, when you hear Learning to Live, Under a Glass Moon, there's so many great songs off this album. And of course, the band's lone hit, Pull Me Under. I mean, how could you not talk about that? It's their biggest song. James LaBrie wears a Napalm Death shirt during the video for it. It's so rad. But yeah, this is the quintessential progressive metal album. It's not progressive rock, it's not alternative rock, it's not a heavy metal album. It's one of the first albums that you can genuinely say is a progressive metal album. And I say that even more than Fate's Warning and Queensryche, who did it just a little bit before. Yeah, I'm still gonna stand by it. Images and Words was one of the first progressive metal albums, and the first real progressive metal album. And it's amazing what else would happen, because shortly after this album came out, the grunge era started, and ooh, Dougie, you weren't gonna hear prog on the radio no more. But for that little bit of time, it was so great to see that they got the recognition they deserved at such a young time in the band's discography. And several years later, I was able to discover them perfectly in New Jersey or New York, and then being able to explore New York City and have that be the soundtrack to the city, truly. And it's always going to stand out to me. Dream Theater is always going to be a band that's near and dear to me, even if I don't have a favorite band anymore, even if I don't really hold Dream Theater in the highest regards anymore. I still love them. I love this album. And if you want to hear more of my thoughts on Dream Theater, of course, I did a backwards marathon on Dream Theater, and you should check it out if you want to hear me go over the entire discography up to this point. And there you go, folks, my top 10 albums of 1992. If you liked what I had, if you didn't like what I have, or if you want to tell me how wrong I am for my own personal taste, tell me in the comments below, or tell me what are your top 10 albums of 1992. And of course, like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and more than anything, share. I notice so much when people actually share my video, because my natural reach sucks. If you can share this with people, whether you love it, hate it, or think it's okay, it'll get more views, and that's all I want to do, is just spread the message of good music. And from here, I got everything from death doom to progressive metal to hardcore to industrial. And what's 1993 gonna offer? Well, you'll have to tune in next week to find out. But until then, until my next video, top 10, reviews, or any other kind of video that I put up here for Heavy Debriefings, this is Josh Runquist saying, see ya.